And, I'm not an expert, right, in the politics there and in the situation. So I want to resist giving a specific answer, right, because I'm not an expert, and you would see that as soon as I started talking about the specifics. But I would say, in the fight for justice, exposing evil and speaking the truth is very important, right? And so I think, to shortcut and say, well, we need to go immediately to, we always should work for peace and reconciliation, but part of that reconciliation is truth telling. Okay, so if you think about the sacrament of reconciliation in the church, right, it's first confessing your sins, right, and then having a firm purpose of amendment, and then being forgiven. Okay, but you can't short circuit the confession and the truth telling. So I think it's part of the Christian charge, right, to point to difficulties and injustices and evil, right? I think so. In other words, not to, as we say in the States, to paper over it, not to pretend that it's not there, right? So I think what your question is, do we skip that step of, pointing out the evil and confronting evil? And I don't think so. Jesus points out evil, right? Jesus points out where people are sinning, and where people are selfish, and where people are not merciful. Now we have to do it without hating other people, right? But I think it's important to point those things out in order to have a true reconciliation. I think that the sacrament of reconciliation, of penance, can show us the way forward. It's both and, right? It's both pointing towards the evil and working for justice, and also working for peace and reconciliation. First of all, I'm sorry for your pain, and I'm sorry about your friends. I think one thing to remember, that we're all called to be holy and participate in justice in our own way. Okay, and so even if you cannot participate in the demonstrations, personally, right, you may be called to be, a witness in other ways, right? We can't all be activists, and we can't all be on the front lines, and we can't all be doing the kinds of things sometimes that we imagine the great saints doing. We can't all be Francis Xavier, right? We can't all be, Therese of Lisieux. And yet someone like Therese shows us the value of doing small things in our lives, right? So, God has given you yourself a particular task, and it might be supporting your friends. It might be praying for them, right? It might be giving people advice. It may be kind of being the calm center of things. And I think sometimes when we compare ourselves to other people and say, oh, I should be doing this, I should be doing something different, we can denigrate the good that we do ourselves, right? So you're called to do your own thing, and that doesn't mean it's any better or worse than anybody else is doing. Does that make sense, right? So we can kind of, in the Jesuits, we have this expression, compare and despair. If you compare yourself to someone else and say, oh, I should be like them, you're denigrating the gift that God is giving you. As for your friends who are in detention, I think, basically praying for them, trying to keep in touch with them, helping them however you can. Also in your prayer, expressing to God your sadness and your frustration. Always, I think, being honest with God in your prayer is essential in these situations. Okay. I hope
Thank
that
you.
helps. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'll keep you in my prayers too. That's a very good question. And I think people struggle with that in times of political turmoil. We had some in the United States recently, also in terms of the pandemic. I would say this, it's natural to be emotional. All right. And so, when you're having this great unrest in Myanmar that is, being seen by everybody across the world, it's historic, and it is not surprising that you would feel emotions. And so the first thing might be to say, that's natural, and not to get upset about it. Okay. Don't get angry. As St. Francis de Sales said, don't get angry at yourself for being angry. Okay. Um, I think that one of the keys is, as I was just saying to Joseph, is being honest about those emotions in your prayer. And that's where Ignatian contemplation can be so helpful. Imagining yourself with Jesus in prayer, and expressing your emotions to Jesus, right? As honestly as you can. And look, Jesus got angry. There are many times in the Gospels where he gets angry. He gets angry at the desecration of the temple, right, in Jerusalem, right? As you could say, people get angry about the desecration, of your country, in different ways, right? So it's not surprising that he would get angry, or that you would get angry. I guess when I talk about calm, I'm talking about the calm that comes in terms of the discernment of spirits. Okay, so while you can be angry about something exteriorly, that makes sense. You can be angry at a situation. You can be angry at the injustice. You can still find a place of peace when it comes to the decision that you've made. This is the way I'm going to proceed. Okay, this is the way I'm going to move ahead. And so that there's a sense where you become less confused, because I think the evil spirit can confuse us and distract us. The good spirit, I think, is the spirit of peace and the spirit of clarity. So the emotions themselves are nothing to be embarrassed about and nothing to be ashamed about, but rather something to express with God and with your friends. But I think at some point, to come to a sense of, let's say, clarity or sureness, maybe calm is not the right word, clarity or sureness about your path. But certainly, if you see things that are happening that are unjust, I think anger sometimes is the appropriate reaction. The other thing to remember is that you may be feeling God's anger, right? Again, I mean, how else would God work through us other than to arise in us a sense of injustice, right? Or a sense of disgust. Okay, so all these things. This is where discernment comes in. That's why I'm so big on discernment, and Jesuits are so big on discernment. Looking at the emotions, trying to really be honest about where they're coming from. Are they selfish or selfless motives? And then judging and acting and coming to a sense of decision, and then feeling a sense of peace. I know that's a very painful situation, and it's very different. But in our country, there was a similar situation recently in terms of where can the church stand and how much can the church do. I would say this. I think that in general, and I'm saying I'm not an expert, but I think that the church, should always resist aligning itself with one political party or another, right? I'm sure you agree, because I see you nodding. So because the church needs to maintain its freedom, right? It's freedom. And of course, Jesus, when he's asked about the coin, right? Whose coin in this? Should we pay taxes or not? He does the same thing. He says, I'm not going to sort of say whether I'm for Caesar or against Caesar, right? Because he wants to, as I see it, maintain his freedom. I think that this is where discernment comes in. So, for example, in your situation where you are, to say, are there ways that I can be creative about my support of people, okay, without sort of aligning myself with a political party, or without going against, what the cardinal says, right, or without putting the church in a difficult situation. All right. So I guess what I'm saying is, I don't want to give you a specific answer about what to do, but I want to encourage you to say to yourself, I, Sister Lucy, am in this particular situation with these particular people, and here are things that I can do. Okay, so it is not like one size fits all, and here are the list of things to do, but rather to say, I believe through my conscience and through my ability to see where God is, discern the best things for me to do. So I'll give you an example. So perhaps you say, I've discerned that I don't want to march in the demonstrations because of what the cardinal said. but there's a group of people who I know who are marching in the demonstration, and maybe I can bring them together to have a group discussion or a faith sharing or a prayer group, right? So I think there are ways of being creative, but what I guess I'm saying is to trust you. Okay. So can, if you, even by Zoom or by, by telephone or by text, right, in some way, if you know people who need your support, right? Do you know what I'm saying? I think that's more important than a kind of list of rules of what to do and what not to do. I really I trust your conscience in this. I really would. And to be free about that. That God has put you there. God has not put Pope Francis there or the Cardinal there or St. John Paul or Mother Teresa. God has put you in that situation among your friends, among the people that you want to support. And so to trust that, and you're going to be able to discern what kinds of creative solutions that you'll be able to do. That's more important than any list of list of things to do that I could give you. To trust in the Holy Spirit in your life. It sounds very painful in terms of trying to reconcile those things. And again, I'm not an expert in the situation in your country, but the idea of where are we in terms of opposing the violence, I think that Jesus is always our model, right? And I think we always need to go back to that. And so Jesus is always opposing violence, right, in his own way, right, by standing up, by speaking out, but he is never violent himself. Okay. And even on, it's a very difficult message, and it seems counterproductive sometimes. But I think this is the great insight of Dr. Martin Luther King in the United States, this peaceful nonviolence. I keep thinking of, even when Jesus is nailed to the cross, he doesn't respond, but that does not mean that he is inactive or that he has not raised his voice. I mean, his whole life is a response to violence and to death, right? I mean, it in a sense, I mean, the story of Lazarus, for example, if someone said it's not just raising Lazarus from the dead, it's a kind of critique of all things that, are against life, right? That are about violence. And it's sort of moving away from that kind of culture of death and culture of violence. So what does that mean in the real term? I think what it means is that we try in every way that we can to peacefully respond to violence, to be honest about it, to be blunt about it, but we don't participate in it. Okay. So I know it's a difficult thing, and I'm struggling even in answering it because I know you're in a difficult situation, and I don't want to tell you something, that I'm ignorant of, but I do think that always by looking at Jesus and Jesus's response, so he's not, I think, when we think about him being nailed to the cross, we think, well, oh, it's just passive. He just accepts suffering. No, that's not true at all. I mean, his life, he doesn't accept that until it's the end, until it's necessary. The rest of his life is being very shrewd and being very blunt about his critiques. Okay. He's not afraid. The other thing I want to say is this, that people tend to forget, in the Gospels, we tend to always look at the last 3 days of Jesus's life, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Saturday, and then Easter, his acceptance of suffering, and his acceptance of violence. Jesus frequently in the Gospels escapes from people who are going to kill him, right? In the rejection at Nazareth, he slips through their midst. When some people are looking for him, he escapes, right? So what I'm saying is his life is not about avoiding sort of being blunt about violence. Okay. He's very blunt. It's not just about the suffering, and it's not just about his death, right? It's about his public ministry is what I'm trying to say. Okay. And he takes time to to rebut these things, to confront violence, all right, with love, always with love. So it's wrong to say, well, we just have to accept it and be passive. That's not what Jesus is doing. It's not just about his being crucified. Think about his public ministry too, where he is constantly calling out injustice and poverty and healing people who are sick and calling us away from death, right? So to keep those two things in balance. Again, I can't give you sort of specifics, but I think that the model of Jesus is the model for all of our action. And again, it's up to you to discern what is that model in my own life. That I think is the most important thing. So not here as a list of what Father Martin thinks you should do. I know that the model of Jesus is what I need to follow. What is it in my own particular life, and how can I discern that? And to trust that God's going to lead you in that. Does that make sense? I won't sugarcoat it. It's very difficult. It's difficult to see violence and injustice and not feel the desire to respond. But what is the response? The response is Jesus's response, which is to be clear about injustice, but also to not participate in violence. I mean, Jesus, even on the cross, Jesus does not respond in that way. And that's the Christian way. I mean, look, in the Garden of Gethsemane, when Peter takes his sword out, Jesus says, put it back. It's a very hard message, but I think it's essential. It's essential because I think also from a realistic point of view, we lose our credibility if we participate in violence. Okay, and I'll pray for you too. First of all, I'm sorry to hear about your pain and about your friend being shot. I want to focus on that question of being overwhelmed, which I think is a very good one. I would say a couple things. First of all, I would say you talked about your disobedience. It sounds like you were being obedient to your conscience, and I think that's an important thing, right? Just again, discern what is the right thing to do in your situation. So I want to say that to everybody, that God is working through your individual consciences, and to discern, where these voices are leading you. But also by listening to what the cardinal says and your religious leaders say and what the church says. But trust that your conscience is going to help you make good and healthy decisions. That's the first thing. The second thing is the overwhelmed. I think that sometimes we get overwhelmed. Okay, first would be to express your emotions to God. You've just come out of the long retreat, and you know all about the colloquy, where we just speak to God. And for those who don't know what that is, it's just imagining yourself with Jesus or with God, and just speaking, as Saint Ignatius says, one friend to another. And so that can sometimes help to just unburden us, just to get it off our chest. And we might say, well, God already knows what we think, but God wants us to express ourselves, right? To unburden ourselves, to grow in intimacy. And so if you think there's no one who can hear it, to just tell it to God. But the other thing, in terms of being overwhelmed, I would say the most important thing is to remember you can't do everything. You can't do everything. You can't listen to everyone. You can't counsel everyone. You can't be at every demonstration. You can't be the person who takes care of everyone. You can't. Okay. And that's a certain embrace of your own powerlessness and your humility before God. My spiritual director likes to say, this is a little lighthearted, but sometimes it's good. My spiritual director likes to say that there's good news and there's better news. Do you know this, sister? Have you heard this? The good news is,
I heard you say that.
Yeah, the good news is there is a Messiah. The better news is it's not you.
It's not me. Yeah.
And so you can't do everything. And sometimes our feelings of being overwhelmed are because we try to do everything. And so a simple spiritual tool, in addition to discernment, which sounds somewhat silly, is do your best. Do your best. And also remember the need for self-care. Because you'll be no good to anybody if you're tired and exhausted and sick and just so the feeling of feeling of being overwhelmed is sometimes a response, a reflection of trying to do everything, and you can't. And to be able to say, I can't do this, is actually a sign of humility, paradoxically, because sometimes we think, well, Jesus wants us to do everything. Jesus does not want us to do everything. The other thing that I want to say about Jesus in this situation is very surprising to people. When Jesus left the earth, right, at the ascension, there were still people in Galilee and Judea who were sick and poor. Okay, he didn't heal everybody. Even Jesus, I mean, Jesus, of course, accomplishes everything in a spiritual sense, but in a practical sense, there were still sick people in Nazareth and Galilee. He did not heal everybody. Jesus took care of the person in front of him. Okay, and so sometimes we think about to be Christian means to do everything, and it does not. Because we cannot, because we're not God. And so I think sometimes letting go of that need to do everything and to just do your best is a mark of humility and can help you feel less overwhelmed. To be blunt, I think that we don't pray for evil to happen to somebody. And I think, you might say to your brother, when Jesus is on the cross, he doesn't pray for his executioners to be killed. He actually prays for them to be forgiven. That doesn't mean we don't pray for justice and we don't pray for peace, but it's separating that desire to harm our enemies from the desire to help people. So it's hard. I think you can just encourage him gently and saying, look, there's other things that we could pray for, right? We don't have to pray for someone to die. And look, that's the other thing about doing your best. Sometimes in these situations with our family, we can't convince our family of something. Sometimes they are the most difficult people sometimes to minister to. And that's also the powerlessness too, that you may have to say to yourself, I can't convince my brother of something, and that's okay. I'm not God. I can't change his mind. And that's okay. So Mary, I would say just do your best. And I think part of it is encouraging him, listening to him, loving him, being open to him. But again, remembering that you may not be able to change his mind, and that's okay. Not giving yourself the task of changing his mind, but just being loving and supportive of him. I don't think God refuses anything that we offer him, that is sincere. So you mean if you share something that's painful with God, you mean a painful emotion, you're wondering if God hears that?
Yeah.
I think God hears all those things. I mean, look at the way Jesus in his public ministry is listening to all sorts of pain, right? Is listening to people who are angry and people who are frustrated. The story of the father of the epileptic boy who comes up to Jesus and says, help my son, right? He's constantly meeting people who are talking about being in painful situations, right? The Roman centurion who comes up and says, my servant is sick, right? The man who is at the pool of Bethesda, who's been suffering for 38 years and says, no one will take me down, right? Remember that story? That's a very painful situation. Jesus is always listening to people. So I would never doubt that God hears your pain, ever. God hears everything and wants you to share that with him. Thank you. Right. Jesus invites us away from fear. Okay. Sometimes it's natural to be afraid, right? If you're in a difficult situation or a scary situation, it is natural to be afraid. But Jesus is always inviting us beyond the fear. Even if you are fearful interiorly inside, one thing you can do is not allow the fear to influence your decisions. Do you know what I mean? Like you can have that fear inside, but when you make a decision about what to do, whether or not to speak out, whether to go to a demonstration, whether to help a friend, you can be afraid inside, but not let it affect your decision. You can say that I'm going to decide to do this for a reason of hope or a reason of courage, a reason of confidence in Jesus, even though I might have that interior feeling of fear.
Line today, near in your rich object, I think of